Christina Renee King. Christina Renee King, affectionately called Cricket by her family because of her petite size, was born in 1972 and lived in Kansas City, Kansas. She was married to Christopher Wayne Goodall, a professional roofer, and their marriage was filled with love and devotion. In 1988, they welcomed their first daughter, April, followed by the birth of their second daughter, Ashley, 3 years later. Due to Christopher's inability to fully support their family with his job, Christina sought other ways to provide for them. Reports suggest she began offering escort services in the Central Street area to make ends meet. Unfortunately, at some point, Christopher was incarcerated, deepening Christina's feelings of hopelessness. Despite the stigma associated with her circumstances, those close to her knew her as a kind-hearted person. However, the harsh realities of life on the streets forced her into a difficult situation, one that many failed to see beyond the label, missing the humanity behind her struggles. Christina experienced a brief period of incarceration, but her recent release from prison marked a somber chapter in her life. Unfortunately, the day after her release would be her last. In 1998, April, who was in 5th grade and celebrating her 10th Christmas, received devastating news. On Christmas morning, a group of boys scavenging for scrap metal in the driveway of an abandoned nursing home made a horrifying discovery. They stumbled upon a partially unclothed body, bearing signs of severe beatings and abandonment. The victim had endured blunt force trauma to the head, with her pants partially pulled down. Her bra, shoes, and personal belongings were found scattered nearby. Her face had been brutally disfigured. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Contributing to the horrific scene, the Kansas City Police Department informed Christina's family, delivering the heartbreaking news that would change their lives forever. The victim was identified as 26-year-old Christina King, and an investigation was launched to uncover the truth behind her tragic death and to identify the person responsible. Penny Barnett, the mother of Christina, consistently followed up with the KCPD in her quest for information. However, unbeknownst to Barnett, the police had actually obtained a lead. A used condom discovered at the crime scene alongside Christina's lifeless body. Unfortunately, there was a significant amount of negligence and incompetence on the part of the police, but I will delve into that later. On one occasion, during a phone call, Detective Terry Mass treated Penny Barnett so harshly that she ended up hanging up in tears. When her husband questioned her about her distress, she explained that Detective Mars had been insensitive and used inappropriate language when discussing Christina. The police seemed to hold a clear bias against Christina, often referring to her as just a street walker and therefore not a priority in their investigation. This prejudiced attitude became evident throughout the case. Later in life, April had the chance to view the autopsy photos of her mother, which left her horrified by the numerous injuries, abrasions, and bruises covering Christina's body. In 2010, Christopher Goodall passed away, leaving the two girls orphaned. However, even before this tragedy, their family had already been fractured by Christina's untimely death. For 5 years, Ashley and April had been fending for themselves, with Ashley, at just 14 years old, scouring Quindaro in search of the person responsible for her mother's murder. Quindaro, once a thriving settlement, had become an abandoned ghost town, and was considered unsafe during the 90s. Ashley found herself in perilous situations, desperately seeking closure. Eventually, she got into a truck with someone she believed had a connection to her mother's killer. This individual was initially considered a suspect because Christina King's cousin, along with 2 other women, had allegedly stolen a large amount of his illicit substances. However, this turned out to be nothing more than a rumor circulating on the streets. Fortunately, he was not the person Ashley was searching for, and he did not harm her. 2 decades went by without significant progress in the case. Then, in December 2021, the family came together at the intersection of North 27th Street and Sewell Avenue for a prayer vigil and a balloon release in honor of Christina. The vigil had been organized by Justice for Wyandotte, an advocacy group committed to promoting transparency in law enforcement. The group extended their support to Christina King's investigation, as they aimed to assist the loved ones of those who had been mistreated by the legal system. Khadija Hartway, a member of Justice for Wyandotte, took charge of coordinating the entire event. During her address to the attendees, she emphasized the significance of cases like Christina's, highlighting the urgent need for the Kansas Police Department to establish a cold case unit. Hardway urged the new police chief to allocate existing funds towards the establishment of this unit, as she believed it will enhance transparency in addressing both cold cases and ongoing investigations. This plea prompted a significant response within the KCPD, ultimately resulting in a breakthrough in Christina's case. The newly appointed police chief, Carl Oakman, took Hartway's request seriously and acted swiftly. Upon being sworn in on January 1, 2021, he made a firm commitment to establish a cold case unit within the department. True to his word, by January 2022, Kansas City's first cold case unit became operational, staffed by 3 dedicated full-time detectives. This unit would prove instrumental in resolving long-standing cold cases. Understanding the origins of Justice for Wyandotte is essential. It all began with Pearl Davis, a 43-year-old mother. Born in 1953, Pearl Barnes was Khadija Hardaway's cousin and a devoted mother to her 2 young children. Pearl, also known as Semima Musa, was an active member of the Kansas City Islamic community. She worked tirelessly to provide for her children, offering her services as a skilled seamstress and running a transportation business that catered to the Chillicothe Correctional Facility. In addition to her many responsibilities, Pearl worked as an SRS driver, ran a daycare, sold dinners and bean pies, and remained deeply involved in her family's life. With such a strong presence in the community, her sudden disappearance did not go unnoticed. Unfortunately, Pearl's lifeless body was discovered on November 22, 1996, in an abandoned house on Lafayette Avenue in Kansas City. The property had once belonged to her late mother. The autopsy conducted on Pearl revealed a chilling and disturbing truth. She had been brutally stabbed more than 40 times, her clothing forcibly removed and scattered nearby. The responsibility of investigating this case fell upon Detective Roger Golubsky of the Kansas Police Department. However, Detective Golubsky faced allegations of misconduct, as he had abused his position of authority on multiple occasions. From 1983 to 2008, the Kansas Police Department failed to properly investigate a series of similar cases involving women, most of whom were working women of similar ages. These women often found themselves grappling with homelessness, substance addiction, or engaged in escort services. The tragic fates of these women were marked by horrific methods, including strangulation, asphyxiation, blunt force trauma, or stabbing. Their lifeless bodies were callously discarded in secluded areas or abandoned buildings. Shockingly, all of these women were found either partially or fully unclothed, with their pants pulled down or shirts removed. Their clothing was often discovered nearby, further highlighting the brutality of these crimes. Christina King, too, endured these terrifying circumstances. As time passed and the cases grew cold, it became increasingly evident that something was amiss with Golubsky. Despite his familiarity with most, if not all, of the women who had been mercilessly slain, none of the case files indicated his knowledge of these individuals. Furthermore, despite the abundance of potential physical evidence that could have been analyzed, these particular cases received insufficient attention from forensic experts. As a result, evidence collection was often limited, and efforts to identify potential perpetrators through DNA or other forensic means were inadequate. The level of incompetence displayed was truly staggering. In Christina King's case, the Kansas Police Department had received a DNA match with a potential suspect but failed to pursue a follow-up investigation. Khadija Hardway, deeply moved by the prolonged neglect of Golubsky's victims, began pleading for justice. She found the motivation to rally the community, organizing demonstrations to ensure the unsolved cases, the faces of the affected women, and their stories would not be forgotten. Driven by Pearl's case, Khadija partnered with like-minded women to establish a non-profit organization called Justice for Wyandotte in 2020. The organization worked diligently to combat the department's corrupt individuals. Officers were observed using excessive force, bullying, intimidating, fabricating evidence, wrongfully arresting individuals, and coercing false testimonies to avoid false accusations and imprisonment. Thanks to Justice Foria and Dutch shedding light on the crimes, they exposed the systematic corruption. They brought attention to the case of Lamonta McIntyre, who was falsely accused and imprisoned for 23 years for a crime he did not commit. Despite being exonerated in 2017, he never received justice. Golubsky remained free, but many unresolved issues lingered, particularly regarding his victimization of women. During her work with the Justice for Wyandotte organization, Khadija Hartway arranged a meeting with Carl Oakman, a former candidate for chief of police. In this meeting, she emphasized the disturbing and unacceptable indifference surrounding unsolved cold cases in the community, underscoring the lasting emotional toll on Kansas City families and their loved ones. She passionately advocated for the creation of a cold case unit within the Kansas City Police Department. Following the meeting with Oakman, Justice Foria initiated an awareness campaign and petitioned for the establishment of a dedicated cold case unit, aiming to address the numerous unsolved cases that had occurred in Kansas City since 1965. In 2003, police received a DNA match from the condom found near Christina's body, identifying Gary Davis as the suspect. Surprisingly, he was not immediately questioned, despite being closely monitored by Wyandotte County Community Corrections. Gary Davis, a 52-year-old Kansas City resident, was a truck driver in his early 20s at the time of the alleged incidents involving Christina and Pearl. Due to the nature of his job, it was understandable why he had managed to evade suspicion back then, as he often traveled far from the crime scenes. Despite the police being aware of his whereabouts, it took 20 years to arrest Gary Davis. The investigation moved slowly, with a 14-month delay before questioning the suspect, followed by years of stagnation. After a public appeal for justice for Wyandotte in 2021, it took another 18 months to process the DNA, form a team, and finally apprehend the perpetrator. In 2022, the cold case unit made a breakthrough, linking the DNA from both crime scenes to Gary Davis Sr., the initial suspect. Investigators also found a Facebook page matching Davis's name and description, with controversial posts about truck driving and societal issues. When attempting to contact him, officers found only one operational phone number out of 3 listed with a full voicemail inbox. Finally, in September 2023, Davis was arrested and charged with the murder of Christina King, with bail set at $500,000. Importantly, there was no statute of limitations, ensuring that justice could be served regardless of the time that had passed. If convicted, Davis could face life imprisonment. In a surprising turn of events, Wyandotte County District Attorney Mark Dupree and Kansas City Police Chief Carl Oakman jointly conducted a press conference to commend their investigative efforts. Dupree highlighted the relentless work of the detectives, while Oakman underscored the importance of a thorough investigation over the significance of the DNA hit. Both officials stressed the meticulous effort required to ensure the correct suspect was identified. Meanwhile, in March 2022, attorney Cheryl Pellet, representing Kansas City, exposed the corrupt environment within the Kansas Police Department. She issued a statement targeting not only disgraced Detective Roger Golubsky, but also the culture that allowed his misconduct to persist. Golubsky, who was responsible for an unjust arrest, faced federal charges, including kidnapping, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Currently, the Kansas Police Department is working with other law enforcement agencies to investigate whether Davis could be connected to other homicides, either in the region or potentially far beyond, given his profession as a long-haul truck driver. Davis is currently considered a suspect or person of interest in at least 8 other cases. The creation of the Cold Case Unit, driven by Justice for Wyandotte, has led to the resolution of 11 additional cases. It is clear that the Kansas Police Department is accountable for the delayed arrest, which could have occurred much earlier. The department owes the victims' families, especially Christina's daughters who sought closure for years, a sincere apology and a detailed explanation. The families, who have endured prolonged distress, were ultimately victims of the department's failure and incompetence. Moving on to the next case. Edward Anthony Neese. In October 2003, two fishermen discovered the body of a man in a drainage area on freight property in Bensalem, Pennsylvania. The man had no identification, and his description did not match any missing person reports from the area. An autopsy revealed no trauma to the body, and the cause of death was determined to be drowning. However, the manner of death could not be determined, according to police. He was estimated to be between 30 and 40 years old. Bensalem police compared the unknown man to numerous missing person reports over the next 19 years without success. He was buried beneath a marker bearing a placeholder name in the Doylestown Cemetery while attempts to identify him continued. A former Bensalem Township Police detective and cold case investigator, McMullen, 54, became preoccupied with finding a modern way to solve open-ended cases. In 2022, he founded Cold Case Initiative, a nonprofit that helps fund such investigations, which can be expensive. In December 2022, Bensalem police obtained hair samples from the Bucks County Coroner's Office that were collected at the autopsy. The samples were sent to a private laboratory which obtained a DNA profile. The funding was received from Cold Case Initiative. In October 2023, the search and subsequent investigation led investigators to speak with a man that said his son went missing around the time the body was found. He provided a DNA sample, and it was a match. The body was then identified as Edward Anthony Neese. "This one is our first solve," McMullen said Tuesday. "We are so excited." Edward's father, 75, a retired diesel mechanic, said that these days, he is still feeling foggy, a little confused about it all. "I waited 20 years for word about my son," he said. He and his former wife would go to police stations to file missing persons reports and to check in to learn whether officers had picked up any clues. This was before cell phone days when you could maybe find someone, he said. He added that the spot where his son was found was not far from his home. "I just found it extremely hard to believe someone could go missing less than a mile from your house, and it takes 2 decades to find out," he said. "I do not know what to say. I have felt relief but sadness, but then I get to have closure." He was buried properly. "His mother and I have been up to the cemetery, and we changed that nameplate from an unknown to his name. We are now in the process of putting up a gravestone." Edward, who was 31 when his body was discovered, had worked as a forklift operator at a trucking firm in Delanco. He was really happy, making real good money. Things were going well for him, but the Bensalem police stated that they would like to acknowledge the dedicated work of the Bensalem Township Police Department detectives and the Cold Case Initiative partnership. Without their help, the family of Edward Anthony Neese would still be left wondering what happened to their loved one. Although the man has been identified, officials have not revealed whether the manner of his death has been determined or if foul play was involved. Moving on to the next case. Julie Ward. Julie Ann Ward's passion for wildlife photography led her to Africa in 1988. A skilled photographer, she had long dreamed of capturing the continent's wildlife up close. Tragically, her dream was cut short when, just before the conclusion of her journey, she disappeared without a trace. This sparked a long and relentless search by her father, John Ward, who dedicated the next 35 years to uncovering the truth of her fate. Julie was remembered by her family, particularly her parents, John and Jan, and her 2 younger brothers, Tim and Bob, as someone whose love for nature and adventure left a lasting mark on those who knew her. Julie's journey took her to Kenya, where she embarked on a tour of some of Africa's most renowned wildlife reserves. She was part of a group organized by a travel company, but she had a keen interest in venturing out on her own to capture more intimate shots of the animals. Julie's love for photography led her to be particularly drawn to the Masai Mara, a popular destination known for its diverse wildlife. However, on September 6, 1988, Julie's journey took a tragic turn. She was last seen on a remote part of the reserve, but by the time she failed to return to her group, panic set in. Despite an immediate search effort, there was no sign of Julie. Her disappearance became a major mystery, with many wondering if she had encountered an accident, been attacked by wildlife, or worse, had fallen victim to foul play. During her stay at the Well-Dixon estate, Julie formed a strong bond with Paul and Natasha. The couple often invited her to join them on outings and excursions, and Julie became very comfortable with them. She also spent a lot of time with their dogs, enjoying the peaceful and scenic surroundings of the estate. Julie continued to photograph wildlife in the area, even capturing some of the local animals on their property. As her time in Nairobi drew to a close, Julie began making plans to visit other parts of Kenya. She was particularly excited about going to the Masai Mara, where she hoped to witness and document the great wildebeest migration, a rare and awe-inspiring natural event that had been a dream for her as a photographer. Her trip was meant to culminate in the stunning images that would showcase her passion for wildlife, but her plans would soon be interrupted in the most devastating way. She later rented a cottage from the couple's neighbor in August of 1988. On the September 2nd, Julie and her Australian friend, a biologist, Glenn Burns, drove to Masai Mara in Julie's second-hand Suzuki Jeep, which she had purchased in Nairobi. The two had planned to watch the annual wildebeest migration from neighboring Tanzania's Serengeti National Park into the Mara. They set up camp at the Sand River campground. The next day, the two drove across the park but were interrupted in their travels by their Jeep breaking down. The delay in fixing the Jeep left Julie stranded at the Morris Arena Lodge for a bit longer. Despite the inconvenience, she made the best of the situation, enjoying the lodge's serene environment and continuing her photography work. Julie kept in touch with her family and friends, reassuring them that she was safe and well, though clearly growing frustrated by the delay. Glenn, having returned to Nairobi for his conference, kept his promise and arranged for a replacement fuel pump to be sent. During her solo stay, Julie continued to make the most of her time in the area, and she was in high spirits when she spoke to Glenn on the phone, eager to return to Nairobi and resume her travels. However, little did she know, her next few days would lead her down a dark and dangerous path, marking the beginning of a mystery that would go unsolved for decades. On July 6, 1988, Julie was last seen alive at the lodge. Despite the promises of a quick return to Nairobi, she never made it back. Her sudden and mysterious disappearance would send shockwaves through her family and friends, sparking an intense search for answers that would last for years. He sent that replacement pump on the September 5th. However, it arrived late in the day, so Julie spent yet another night at the Mars Serena Lodge. On September 6th, around midday, Julie left Serena Lodge for Sand River Campground. Her plan was to collect the 2 tents that she and Glenn had left on site 3 days prior, and after grabbing her gear, her intention was to head to Nairobi. David Njoko, a clerk at the Sand River Campground, saw Julie at around 2 p.m. inside the campground. After leaving the campsite, Julie's journey seemed straightforward, as she was heading towards Kikarak Lodge, a known waypoint on her route to Nairobi. Constable Gerald Carroll's account of helping her dismantle the tents and witnessing her departure at 2:30 p.m. added a degree of certainty to the timeline. However, from this point onward, Julie's whereabouts became a mystery. Despite the clear path ahead, Julie never reached her destination. The next known sighting of her was non-existent. As the hours passed without any contact or indication of her arrival at Kikarak Lodge or further progress, her family and friends grew increasingly concerned. The case took a disturbing turn as Julie's Jeep, along with all her belongings, was later found abandoned. But where was Julie? Her sudden disappearance amid the vast, rugged terrain of Kenya raised many questions, and the search for her became one of the most perplexing and unresolved mysteries of the time. She had booked a plane ticket back to England on 10th of September, and before she was to leave, she had planned to spend some time with the Well-Dixons. When Julie did not show up on 6th nor 7th, the two got worried and contacted local hospitals and police stations along the Nairobi-Mara road, fearing that Julie might have been in an accident. When she did not appear for her flight on 10th, the Well-Dixons reported her missing and notified Julie's father, John Ward. John took a flight to Kenya, arriving on the September 12th. By this point, Julie had been missing for 6 days. The discovery of Julie's abandoned Jeep in the McKinley stream was a pivotal moment in the search, but it only deepened the mystery surrounding her disappearance. Despite the Jeep being found, there was no sign of Julie, no footprints, no personal belongings scattered nearby, and no immediate evidence to suggest what had happened to her. The absence of her was unsettling. The police arrived quickly, and an investigation was launched, but the terrain was difficult, and the search area was vast. While the discovery of the Jeep provided a starting point, it also raised further questions. Had Julie been abducted, or had something else occurred that led her to leave the vehicle behind? Had she been injured, or was there a more sinister force at play? John Ward, refusing to give up hope, continued his relentless pursuit of answers. The search effort was extended, and many questions still lingered, with no clear leads emerging despite the extensive resources and time dedicated to the search. Among the items found inside the car were a map, 2 bottles of beer, a pair of binoculars, as well as some personal belongings. John found the location of the car I'd given that it was off of the road and appeared to be heading towards the river. However, the SOS written in the dust on the roof of the Jeep filled him with hope. Perhaps Julie had her car break down again and had decided to walk on foot. Later that same day, Chief Game Warden, Simon McCullough, stumbled upon a suspicious burned-out campfire. The campfire was located near Ole Modiak Gate. Upon further inspection, he discovered human remains amidst the ashes. John rushed to the scene. In the ashes, he found a left leg, jaws, spinal column, and a lock of hair. A skull was found in a nearby bush 1 month later. The rest of the body appeared to have been burned to ashes. John, in a later interview, said, quote, "The fire was about 4 feet in diameter. In it there was a mug, some burnt sunglasses, and film cassettes. Even though I knew it had to be Julie, I wanted to go through the ashes to see if there was something I could find and identify. The odor was one of burned flesh. The fire itself was black and oily. I could find nothing that I could identify. The gathered evidence was peculiar, lacking any signs of a struggle nor blood. There was also the faint smell of petrol." The first autopsy was done by Kenyan police pathologist, Dr. Adal Shaker, who confirmed that the remains were that of Julie Ward. In his report, Dr. Shaker noted that, among other things, the remains have been cut using a sharp implement, and there were subsequent attempts at burning them. To him, this pointed towards a clear case of homicide. However, the official investigation into Julie's death presented a conflicting narrative. While Dr. Shaker unequivocally deemed Julie's death a homicide, stating that the lake was cleanly cut and drenched in petrol before being set on fire, the police disputed this conclusion. Instead, they proposed a theory suggesting Julie was struck by lightning and subsequently mauled by a wild animal such as a lion. When a copy of the autopsy report was eventually seen by her father, it was crudely altered with words crossed out or typed over. John said, quote, "Where Dr. Shaker had typed cleanly cut as far as the leg and jaw were concerned, these words had been changed to torn and cracked. You were starting to talk about an attack by animals and not human beings." It was later found that the autopsy results had been altered by Dr. Shaker's boss, Dr. Jason Cavity, a health advisor to the Kenyan government. In a later interview, Dr. Shaker said, quote, "He took the report. I heard him saying, 'No, no, no,' and saw him underline through some words. I saw him underline through the words, 'cleanly cut.' He said it was only my opinion. I wasn't happy about this, but Dr. Cavity was my boss." John took Julie's remains to England, and a second post-mortem was carried out by Professor Austin Gresham. This second autopsy confirmed Dr. Shaker's initial findings. The investigating police officer in charge of the case, Superintendent Machiri Wanjo, speculated that Julie may have been depressed and may have gone on to commit suicide. He further suggested that Julie was sexually promiscuous. Dr. Shaker said Superintendent Wanjo told him that Julie was, quote, "a loose girl." The superintendent spoke of suicide and how she could have cut her off and may have lit a fire, which could have spread. Kenyan investigators were reluctant to call the death a murder and refused to conduct a homicide investigation. John Ward accused the Kenyan government of wanting to cover up the murder in order to protect the country's tourism industry. Due to this, John Ward decided to launch an investigation of his own. Over the years, he has made several trips in a desperate search for the truth. Following the discrepancies in the autopsy report, an inquest was held into Julie's death in Nairobi. During the inquest, when questioned about the alterations of Julie's death certificate, Dr. Cavity faulted Dr. Shaker's English, arguing that the Egyptian's command of the English language was poor and that his own motive in altering the report was only for the purposes of precision. Yet at the same hearing, Dr. Cavity admitted that out of hundreds of autopsy reports Dr. Shaker had written in the past, this was the first time his lack of English precision had necessitated the editing of his report. B. Inquest also heard the findings of Professor Austin Gresham, who confirmed Dr. Shaker's findings, stating that the injuries on Julie's jaw and her skull indicated she had been decapitated from behind with a sharp blade. The magistrate eventually concluded that Julie was murdered by a person or persons unknown. However, he ordered that no further investigation was required. In February of 1990, at John's urging, the UK Foreign Secretary, Douglas Hurd, sanctioned an inquiry by Scotland Yard investigators, who subsequently travelled to Kenya in order to probe Julie's case. The initial investigation led to the conclusion that two park rangers, Peter Capon and John Majori, were responsible for Julie's murder. The investigation revealed evidence placing Julie at the gate post. Both rangers had been in the Masai Mara Reserve that day, linking them to the scene. However, during the subsequent trial, confusion arose regarding the clerk and the police constable's testimonies. The clerk, David Choko, and the police constable, Gerald Kairuri, were the last people to see Julie when she left Sand River Campground to go towards Nairobi. They came under suspicion during the inquest when Scotland Yard detectives were able to prove that Julie's signature had actually been forged. The clerk, David, had entered Julie Ward's details in the gate register and had signed her name to make it appear that she had signed herself out of the game reserve. Initially, David remained adamant that Julie herself had signed out and had left the Mara. After handwriting experts confirmed that it was not Julie Ward's handwriting, David admitted that actually he had made the entry and had signed against Julie Ward's name afterwards. He said it was not because he wanted to create the impression that she had left the Mara when he knew she had not, but because he had forgotten to give her the register to sign when she had already left. He says that as she was already gone, he was forced to sign on her behalf in order to save himself from possible disciplinary action for lacking vigilance in his work. While both the clerk and the police constable claimed they saw Julie leave the campground alone, a later unnamed witness told investigators that they had actually seen an armed man in military fatigues sitting inside of her car. Despite this, all four individuals, the two park rangers, the clerk and the police constable, were acquitted due to insufficient evidence. Later, the chief warden of the reserve, Simon McCalla, became a suspect himself after it was found that he had actually not ordered a search for Julie by any of the 113 rangers under his command. At 11 a.m., on the day Julie's jeep was spotted, McCullough was informed immediately. However, rather than swiftly heading to oversee the ground search, he instead drove 50 kilometers in the opposite direction to Serena Lodge. Not until mid-afternoon did he eventually reach the scene. By then, more than 30 individuals, including rangers, police, and council workers, had already been there and departed for the search. Before towing away the vehicle, police removed Julie's personal belongings and transported them to Sand River Police Post for safekeeping. Among the items removed were maps, a pair of trainers, 2 bottles of beer, binoculars, and various other items such as tents and sleeping bags. When McCullough finally arrived on the scene at 3 p.m., there was no one at the vehicle. However, during the trial of the two park rangers, McCullough told the judge that after he arrived on scene, he, quote, peeked inside, and in the car he said he saw maps, a pair of shoes, 2 bottles of beer, and a pair of binoculars. The inconsistencies in McCullough's statements, coupled with his prior knowledge of the jeep's location and his dubious behavior, fueled suspicions that he was somehow involved in Julie's disappearance. His claim of never driving, despite witnesses contradicting him, raised red flags, especially considering he had driven John Ward during the initial search. The fact that he was the one to arrive at the Jeep's location 3 hours before McCullough's arrival, with items already removed from the scene, further suggested that he had prior knowledge about the Jeep's whereabouts. The oddity of the Jeep's location, off the main road and across difficult terrain, in a spot Julie, a seasoned traveler, would likely not have chosen, only added to the growing doubts surrounding McCullough. If Julie had been driving, it was hard to explain why she would have taken such a perilous route when a safer road was nearby. This mounting evidence raised serious questions about whether McCullough had played a role in Julie's fate, or if he was merely an unfortunate bystander to a far darker event. The investigation into his possible involvement continued, but his shifting stories only deepened the mystery surrounding the case. During the investigation, the police uncovered records of a motor accident involving a vehicle that McCullough had been driving. Moreover, McCullough had radioed at 4:26 p.m. to say that he had found Julie's remains. It was later discovered that McCullough had left the gully, where Julie's Jeep was found, at 4 p.m. For him to have found the body at 4:26, it would have taken him only 26 minutes to cover the 10-kilometer journey in a southeasterly direction in a desolate corner of the Masai Mara. When police tried to retrace McCullough's path, they discovered the quickest journey from the gully to the site of Julie's remains took precisely 26 minutes. This would mean that he traveled directly from Julie's abandoned car to her remains. The area where Julie's hacked body was discovered had no car tracks leading to it, and is identifiable only by a distinctly shaped large tree set among dozens of other smaller trees and bushes. The hidden and secret nature of the environment in which Julie was discovered directly contradicted McCullough's claim that his search was merely that of chance. His story of finding Julie's remains randomly was met by much public and private speculation. Those close to the case say such insider knowledge suggests that McCullough probably had prior information about this specific location. He claims he was led by vultures circling in the sky, but it was pointed out that you could not see an elephant that distance, much less the speck of vultures circling in the sky. A Swiss TV crew had offered their assistance to the investigation using 5 radio-equipped vehicles in the search for Julie. However, McCullough told them to mind their own business. The crew had also heard rumors about Jonathan Moy, son of then Kenyan President Daniel Arap Moi, somehow being involved in the murder of Julie. The crew had heard rumors that Jonathan had been seen with a group of men in the very same park. The Swiss TV crew recorded their account at McCullough's office prior to leaving Kenya. They said that they found McCullough sitting head in his hands, saying that he had been summoned to a meeting with President Moi. Just days after Julie's remains were found, McCullough disappeared from his post at the park. At first, the official line was that he was on leave, but it was later found he had been suspended. He never returned to his position of senior warden of the Masai Mara Game Reserve. One afternoon, while Julie's father was in Kekorak Lodge, he met a woman who told him, quote, "The man who killed your daughter is Jonathan Moy." She said that she had heard allegations about Jonathan Moy everywhere in the park, particularly in the nearby village where Julie's remains were discovered. Later, a letter was sent from Kenya to the UK in which an unidentified writer recounted an incident from September of 1988, the exact same time that Julie went missing. The writer, employed at Kekorak Lodge, described standing near the lodge's gas station waiting for transportation home. She remembered seeing 3 men dragging a white woman from a Land Rover into the government guest house, which was reserved for heads of state and VIPs only. Substantiating this further, in 1992, Valentin Orijo Kadapo, part of a secret militia allegedly paid for by President Moi to target his political adversaries, claimed in an interview that Julie was killed at Jonathan Moy's direction and in the presence of others. The Kenyan government has since repeated the existence of such training camps and has denied Gadapo's employment by them. In September of 1995, Gadapo spoke openly to the UK Daily Mail, stating that he witnessed Julie's murder himself. He asserted that Jonathan Moy ordered for her to be killed after allegedly sexually assaulting her. Jonathan Moy denied any involvement in the case. He claimed he was on his family farm at Aldama Ravine, 250 kilometers away from Mara at the time of Julie's death. Due to his status and lack of evidence, Nothing could link him to the crime and, therefore, no investigation was done. Valentin Kadapov fled Kenya in fear for his life after making such testimony, and lived in exile until his death. Some suggested that Julie may have witnessed illicit activities and was consequently killed for what she knew. Others speculated she may have worked for the British intelligence agency, and that she may have taken pictures of militia camps in the Mara. Such actions, they say, could easily get one murdered in the desert. In 1997, the Director of Criminal Investigations in Kenya appointed a new team of detectives in order to examine the evidence in Julie's case. McCullough was finally charged with Julie's murder. The DCI said that it was evident McCullough had not only deceived authorities about his awareness of the items in Julie's car but that he was also deceptive about his knowledge of the whereabouts of her remains and that he covered up her murder. Despite all this, he was acquitted due to lack of evidence. In 2012, John published a report in Nairobi Law Monthly claiming that Jonathan Moy killed Julie. He gave all of the information he had gathered over the years and published it for the world to see. In the report, he revealed that in 2009, former Superintendent Muchiri Wanjo, who had originally suggested that Julie's death was a suicide, contacted him to talk about what he now considered was Julie's murder. Wanjo claimed that after interviewing a number of civilians, rangers and police officers, he had suspected Jonathan Moy for Julie's murder. However, he said that when he went to his senior officer with this information, he was told to, quote, look somewhere else. He then says he was forced to change his story and avoid any mention that Julie was murdered. He also claimed that McCullough was not involved in Julie's murder directly but that he was told to get rid of her body. He finished his conversation saying that he wanted to meet John again and show him some papers on the various people interviewed. However, John never heard from him. He was later told that Wanjo had died. However, the circumstances surrounding his death was never released to the media. In the report, he also spoke of an informant who had previous ties with Jonathan Moy. This informant shared details and presented photographs of himself with Jonathan Moy. The informant alleged that on September 6, 1988, Jonathan, accompanied by his farm manager, his bodyguards and his driver encountered Julie along their route through the Masai Mara. He says that the conversation turned aggressive, resulting in Julie being sexually assaulted by Jonathan. The informant claimed that fearing Julie might report the assault, Jonathan instructed his bodyguards to kill her. The informant disclosed the names and locations of the bodyguards, the driver, and the farm manager. Additionally, he mentioned that the farm manager, Ibrahim Chub, was married to one of President Moy's daughters and was a close personal friend to Jonathan Moy. Ibrahim supposedly distanced himself from his friend Jonathan due to these events. Allegedly, during an argument between the two, Ibrahim was heard to shout at Jonathan in anger, quote, "One day I will blacken your name around the world for what you did to that girl in the Mara." In 1999, Ibrahim was killed in a car accident. When John Ward met Ibrahim's father, he claimed that Ibrahim was not actually the victim of a car accident, but that he had been murdered. He said that an autopsy report revealed marks on his wrists resembling rope imprints and significant bruises all over his body indicating severe blunt force trauma. The fellow grieving father said that the doctor suspected Ibrahim had likely been suspended by his wrists and beaten, fatally damaging his spleen. The father recounted details from a witness who say they saw a wooden log being placed across the road, which caused Ibrahim's car to swerve and crash. The witness says they observed Ibrahim retrieving a briefcase from the vehicle before being attacked by 3 hooded men. The witness said that initially she believed it was a robbery. Despite authorities labeling Ibrahim's death as an accident, his father believes his son was murdered due to the fact that he was about to reveal what he knew about Julie's death. He says that he was killed by Jonathan's associates in order to keep him quiet. Julie's father also reported that in 2004, a former Kenyan intelligence officer disclosed that he witnessed Julie's brutal murder in an anonymous interview with the Kenyan newspaper. He claimed that 3 men in the reserve assaulted and then murdered her. The officer detailed how Julie was coerced to drive her jeep miles from the Sand River camp, positioning it in a gully. He says that she was then forced to create an SOS mark in dust on the roof of her car suggesting an accident and subsequently for help. The officer admitted to being too frightened to intervene at the time, and said that he remained fearful of coming forward even years later. In 2018, Julie's father asked authorities to get the DNA of Jonathan Moy to confirm if he was responsible for his daughter's murder. However, nothing came of it. In 2019, Jonathan Moy died of pancreatic cancer. His father, the former president of Kenya, passed away 2 months later. With the death of both men, John Ward hoped that those who previously felt afraid to speak up would now summon the courage to come forward. So far there has been no updates on the case, and nobody has come forward to add additional details. Julie's father dedicated 35 years of relentless pursuit in seeking justice for his daughter's killer. John Ward's unwavering dedication to finding the truth about his daughter's disappearance is a testament to his immense love and determination. His self-financed efforts, including over 200 trips to Kenya, and his personal investment of over £2 million, demonstrated his relentless pursuit of justice for Julie. His meticulous investigation, from interviewing witnesses to preserving DNA evidence, illustrated his tireless commitment to uncovering the truth, even in the face of such a complex and unsettling mystery. John's passing in 2023, just after the loss of his wife, Jan, marked a heartbreaking chapter in a long saga. Yet, his sons, Bob and Tim, vowed to continue their father's mission, honoring both his dedication and Julie's memory. Their resolve to carry on John's work reflects the lasting impact of a father's love and the unyielding hope for answers, no matter how many years may pass. The search for justice and closure for Julie continues, fueled by the enduring legacy of John Ward's commitment. Moving on to the next case. Linda Sue Anderson. On April 18, 1993, a biologist conducting a tortoise survey near Tropicana Avenue and Durango Drive in Las Vegas, Nevada, came across a haunting discovery. Partially buried under dirt and covered by several large rocks was a handmade quilt. Upon closer inspection, the biologist noticed human hair and a distinct smell of decomposition. According to Terry Miller, a cold case investigator with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, LVMPD, the Clark County coroner determined that the woman had likely died in mid to late 1991 from multiple gunshot wounds. Despite extensive investigative efforts, her identity remains unknown, and she was named Jane Tropicana Doe. The case went cold. In February 2023, the Metro Police requested that Othram conduct a forensic genetic genealogy investigation of the remains. At last, after more than 3 decades, the LVMPD Cold Case Section identified the victim as Linda Sue Anderson, also known as Linda Sue Andrews. Linda's brother's DNA matched with the then unidentified victim. She was a 38-year-old mother of 3 at the time of her demise and stayed in Henderson, Nevada. Her family last heard from her during a phone call in 1991. Unfortunately, her children thought for all these years that their mother abandoned them due to her suffering from a mental illness, and therefore, she was never reported as missing. Mikkel Kalishan, one of Linda's daughters, told the 8 News Now investigators. So this whole time, we were thinking that she left us, and she did not love us. This is a huge thing in our lives. Linda was living with her husband in Henderson, Nevada, while her children were staying in northern Nevada with their father. We called each other all the time on the phone, Mikkel said. But one day in 1991, Michael's stepfather told her and her siblings that their mother decided to leave and start a new life. He came home. Her stuff was gone, Mikkel said about that conversation. She left a note that she was starting a new life. She does not want anyone to go find her. Mikkel never saw the note, she said. A copy of divorce records filed in 1992 reveals her stepfather believed he last saw Linda in October 1991. Mikkel said she was told her mother was living a double life and having an affair. Everyone was just shocked, she said. They were like, I do not understand why she would leave her children. Linda would not do that. And then we were just like, well, she did. She left us. Mikkel said she hoped one day her mother would contact her. She never expected that call from Metro Police. To know that she had been slain, and we are wondering if she suffered, and we are wondering what she is thinking and who did this to her. We do want to find answers. The hope now is that Linda's identification would lead to more information about who took her life. If you have any information about Linda Sue Anderson or the circumstances surrounding her death, please contact the LVMPD at 702-828-3521. Anonymous tips can also be submitted through Crime Stoppers at 702-385-5555. Moving on to the next case. Noah Donahue. Noah Donahue was a kind, intelligent, and popular teenager with a bright future ahead of him. A gifted musician and passionate about rugby and basketball, Noah thrived at St. Malachy's College, the Catholic grammar school he attended in northern Belfast. Throughout his time there, he earned numerous accolades and was an only child, raised single-handedly by his mother, Fiona Donahue. On June 21, 2020, at 5:41 p.m., Noah left his home in South Belfast to meet some friends at the popular Cave Hill hangout. The boys were reportedly planning to work toward earning extra credits for their Duke of Edinburgh award. Noah was wearing a black helmet, a khaki North Face jacket, gray shorts with an emblem on one leg, a tie-dyed blue hoodie, Nike trainers, and a backpack containing his phone, schoolbooks, a reading book, and his laptop. He set off on his black Apollo bicycle. Over the next 8 minutes, CCTV footage showed Noah traveling up Ormeau Avenue and entering Victoria Square. Between 5:50 and 5:53 p.m., the 14-year-old traveled on Royal Avenue and York Street. According to Noah's family, the choice to travel on these last two streets was an odd one as it was not the most efficient or safe way for him to get to Cave Hill. Reportedly, it was a potentially risky area for Noah, who was a mixed-race Catholic. This has led his family to ask the question, why did he choose this path? Between 5:53 and 5:57, Noah traveled towards York Gate. He was seen on surveillance footage without his backpack, and it is unclear how he came to be without it, but a 33-year-old man named Daryl Paul appeared in court in November 2020 for theft of the bag. According to news reports, Paul attempted to take Noah's laptop to a pawn shop but was turned away because the owner recognized it as belonging to the 14-year-old. Paul was identified via CCTV footage and claimed that he'd found the backpack. After failing to pawn the laptop, he gave it to 28-year-old Maria Nolan for safekeeping. It was found by police in her room in the hostel she was staying at. Her mother claims that while Maria had struggled with addiction, she was no killer and didn't know the laptop belonged to Noah. She is not suspected of being involved in Noah's disappearance and subsequent death. Returning to Noah's journey, the teenager was next seen on surveillance footage at 5:57 p.m. where he traveled along North Queen Street. Around this time, he lost his phone as it was found near a children's play park on the street by a civilian later on who handed it to police. At 6 p.m., Noah cycled towards Grove Wellbeing Center. He then fell from his bike just before the junction with Shore Road. A passing motorist stopped and attempted to aid him, but the 14-year-old got back on his bike and continued on his way. 1 minute later, he was seen cycling without his jacket. Another minute later at 6:02 p.m., he entered Northwood Crescent from Skegnall Avenue. Noah's helmet was later found between 1723 Northwood Road along with his bike, which was left abandoned. Further down the road at number 63, most of his clothing was recovered. It had been placed on a wall. However, his jacket and shorts have never been found. The last sighting of Noah on CCTV was at 6:03 p.m. where he was seen going between houses 89 and 91 naked. Authorities originally reported that this occurrence had taken place at 6:10 p.m., which would leave 7 minutes of time unaccounted for. However, they later corrected this statement and claimed it took place exactly at 6:0:3. Noah's family have noted their suspicions about this change in time. No witnesses saw the teenager removing his clothes and no CCTV showed the incident either. Later that evening, Noah's mother Fiona reported him missing. An extensive search occurred over the next 5 days involving 100 of local volunteers as well as the police and the 14-year-old's family. Then at 9:45 a.m. on Saturday, June 26th, 5 days after Noah was last seen, his loved one's worst fears were confirmed. Noah's body was found in a storm drain behind 85 Northwood Road. Notably, the storm drain had been inspected by the Department for Infrastructure a week before the teenager went missing. It had been left without a padlock. 2 days before Noah's body was found, the padlock was put back on the drain. It was eventually cut off by law enforcement on the 26th, and the area was subsequently searched. It was described as a 1-kilometer stretch of drain without lighting. Prior to Noah's autopsy being conducted, Superintendent Clark stated his suspicion that foul play was not involved. The post-mortem revealed that the cause of death was drowning. There was no physical evidence of a head injury, although it has been theorized by online sleuths that Noah may have suffered a closed head injury. Very little movement has been seen in Noah's case since his autopsy. It has been noted that there were many blind spots on his journey, and that CCTV revealed only 9 minutes of the total time he was out on his bike. Additionally, his family have speculated that he may have been attacked, which is what led to him losing many of his possessions and seeming distressed towards the end of his journey. Noah's case has been shrouded in controversy since the very start, with the police service of Northern Ireland, who had control of the case, receiving much of the criticism from both locals and Noah's family for their failure to handle the case. Firstly, they wrongly told the Donahue family that they'd leafleted the homes on the street where Noah was last seen, but this was untrue. Secondly, authorities had only investigated around 22 of 180 CCTV cameras that were on his route the day he went missing, and detectives had failed to contact residential homes and businesses to ask for copies of their footage. Thirdly, no sample of the water in the storm drain was taken, and the water in Noah's lungs was never compared to it, making it unclear if Noah drowned in that storm drain or somewhere else. Additionally, the lawyer hired by the Donahues stated that the autopsy raised more questions than answers. But that is not where the negligence ended, as law enforcement also failed to track Noah's phone GPS for months, didn't investigate his laptop folly for around 6 months, and finally, did not properly update the Donahues, leaving them to find out many of the case's updates by reading the local papers along with the general public. 18 months later, Noah's case still has many people baffled. If his demise was truly an accident, what happened to cause him to behave in such an erratic and distressed manner? It has been proposed that the 14-year-old suffered an extreme mental break. This is the theory that law enforcement believes. They suggest that Noah entered the storm drain himself, wandered too far and drowned. Initially, they thought he had hit his head after falling off his bike, but they have since walked this idea back, as there is currently no evidence that suggests he did. The next 2 theories in Noah's case propose the idea that he was assaulted off camera. Online sleuths have suggested that he got rid of any items that could identify him while he fled from the attacker, and this is the reason why he ended up taking a different route than normal. It has also been postulated that these attackers chased Noah afterwards and he hid in the storm drain, but was found and drowned by the attackers. If this was the case, however, Reddit users have noted that whoever it was managed to avoid leaving behind DNA evidence and evaded both eyewitnesses and CCTV cameras. The final theories in Noah's case suggest that his behavior was the result of a drug-induced psychosis or confusion, or that he had at some point sustained an undetected injury to his head. Few people believe the former notion, but many feel that the head injury might explain the teen's odd behavior. While an inquest into Noah's demise was held, it was found that the 14-year-old's death was simply an accidental drowning. Earlier this year, the Sunday World published a news article about a prisoner who claimed that his former cellmate had admitted to the abduction and slaying of Noah Donahue. The former cellmate was released from prison in July of 2021. According to the prisoner, the cellmate broke down and admitted that while on his way to carry out a vigilante attack on a local sex offender, he saw Noah and attacked him. Afterwards, he bundled the teen into his car, took him to his flat where he assaulted him further, and then killed him. The former cellmate then allegedly said that other people had helped him dispose of the body. However, the police were unable to find any evidence linking this man to the scene and don't believe he was involved in the case. In the aftermath of Noah's death, his mother Fiona began a social media campaign, #RememberMyNoah, as she continues to look for answers in her son's death and demands accountability from the police service of Northern Ireland. She also established the Noah Donahue Foundation, which focuses on supporting the causes that were important to Noah. To date, the foundation has made donations to the search and rescue team that assisted in the search for Noah while he was missing, as well as to 2 local football clubs and the music department at Noah's school. Anyone with information about Noah or Inger's case can contact Crime Stoppers UK anonymously at 0800 555 111. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.